Remove carcinogens and get your gear compliant clean with Unimac laundry equipment. Find it at alliancelaundry.com/fire.
Hey guys, welcome back to Beyond the Headlines with Chris and Angie. Today we are excited to talk about an article that really pulled me in, at least. It's not something that you would normally hear, especially in the fire service. It is by Chris Logan, who is a battalion chief down in Georgetown, Kentucky. He wrote an article of Firefighter Nation called "Failure is Always an Option." So we got a lot of things to talk about, kind of deep dive into where this came from and why he feels that it's an option, and some of his stories behind the headlines here. So we're going to go ahead and bring on Chris. Hey, Chris. How are you doing?
Good. How are you all?
We're good.
Good. You're not going to hear me talk too much today. I'm not good.
Oh, sorry.
I'm getting over
Chris is not good.
a head cold. So
Chris is not
treat for the audience. I won't be talking much today, which is beneficial for everyone. So I'm going to go ahead and mute my microphone now, and I'll see you guys in 20 minutes.
He's just here for moral support.
Oh, that's good.
You recently wrote an article for Firefighter Nation saying that failure is always an option. And so that's a very interesting statement to say, especially in the fire service, considering I think that we push a lot that you can never fail. So first of all, before we kind of deep dive in that, can you go ahead and just let everybody know what your background is, when you got promoted, and what your position is and where?
Sure. My name's Chris Logan. I'm a battalion chief with the Georgetown Fire Department here in Kentucky. I have been in the fire service career for going on 18 years, and I'm currently hold the position of shift battalion chief over second shift. I was the former training chief until I realized that 40-hour life just wasn't quite for me, even though I do love training. But I'm much happier back on shift with the guys.
That's awesome. That's really awesome. So in your article, you said that you went to the smoke divers for Georgia smoke divers. And
yes, ma'am.
You got to tell the story, because this is actually a career bucket list thing of mine. So you got to tell the story with this. I really kind of want to know what your experience was. And I know you kind of mentioned in there about your age compared to some of the people who go into. So I'd also be curious, at what age were you when you also went into the smoke divers class?
Well, I attempted the Georgia smoke divers in February of 2024. So I was 43, 44. Can't remember. I'm 45 now, so I'll be 46 this year. And I've always been kind of a very physical. I've done the combat challenge, when I was younger in my fire service career, and I always liked rucking, and I always wanted to just do that kind of hard physical challenge. I played football when I was, much younger, did all of that kind of stuff. So I wanted to see if I could make it. It got word crossed our path here in Georgetown about these smoke diver programs. My brother-in-law actually attempted the Indiana smoke diver program, and he kind of sparked my interest with it. And I was really just wanted to see if I could make it. And I applied. I didn't get into the initial selection, but then I was an alternate that got selected in, it had to have been the 1st of December, somewhere around there. So I was training, but I wasn't training good enough, and got into the smoke divers process in February and just couldn't make it through. I'm sure it was a lot of mental, and it was a little bit of physical that bled into a lot of mental. But there's some awesome people that made it through, and some were older than me, I'm sure, that made it through. Or at least around my age. And it just, I just didn't make it through, and it definitely wasn't the program, and it was probably more my preparation and training than it even was my age. So,
yeah.
but that's the story of that. And so I made it through the out of state selection, and then I made it through the initial lunch and PowerPoint and about 30 minutes to an hour of the physical part. And I didn't make it much farther than that. So as far as the actual class and procedure, I can't really talk too much about because I didn't make it very far, but I did my best.
Well, for one, that's awesome that you even went to go do that. But how did your family and coworkers respond to this? You knowing that you went in and you ended up, not making it through. Were they supportive?
Well, they were super supportive of my training. My department was super supportive of sending me down there. They even helped pay for it. And I had nothing but support when I was preparing. My boys, I was running around in gear on air, and my boys were cheering me on in the basement as I would do stuff when it was snowing or something around here. They were super excited for me. My wife was very supportive. When I came back, it was a little tougher. It wasn't that they weren't supportive of the fact that I didn't make it through, and they believe in me and everything like that. It was, I teach them not to quit. I teach them to do their best and to make sure that, everything's put out there. And then I come back unsuccessful, and that's a tough pill to swallow as a dad when you're teaching your boys to never quit.
Right.
And then deep down, that you hung your red webbing up and you quit. And so it's tough, but they understood and they were super supportive. They were glad to have me back home. So.
Yeah. So, and we don't have to get super personal about it, but I know you said you can't get super into it, but at what point do you quit? I mean, like, what was going through your head at that time that you were like, I have to hang it up. Like, there's no way I can't push through this.
Sure. I can only speak for me. Everybody has their own reasons, 100%. Some people try 2 or 3 times before they get through the process, and, that's how they work. Mine was probably what a lot of people's were, is I wasn't physically prepared enough. I didn't physically prepare myself enough before I got there. And even though they probably would have been punished by other people that were struggling, I was getting to the point where they were punishing the others, not punishing, but just working the others more because I was slow and I was not doing enough. And I know that's part of the process. I'm not a dummy, and I know that's part of it. But at the same time, that was all my mind needed to say, to tell itself to get out. And, they tell you not to quit, and they tell you to keep going and don't worry about it and do all that kind of stuff. But when the struggle was happening and the struggle is real, your mind was finding something, and that was what my mind thought. So, and that's really what it was. I mean, I probably could have pushed through, probably could have just destroyed myself and, got through more and maybe evened out and made it through, as the days gone on, and my body would have got used to it. I may have made it, but my mind wasn't willing to go any farther. So
okay, that's okay. I know in the article you described, to use your failure as fuel. So then I know we had just talked about this. I just didn't know, I hadn't heard of it yet. So then you did something else down in, was it Lewisburg, Florida?
It was Leesburg. There was a typo on
Sorry.
Yeah. So it was a typo in the actual Word document, and I didn't realize it until it was too late. But yeah, it's a Proactive Rescue Solutions. It's a one bad tour. It's a 24-hour, just constant physical training. A lot of live fire, I think, is involved, and a lot of physical, obviously workouts and stuff to do the same thing. And to be honest, it was a lot of the same result. Got super excited, got in there, got to pushing myself real hard. And, they had some aspects that I wasn't quite ready for. And, but I did my best.
Yeah.
And I didn't feel as bad. I didn't feel as bad as bowing out of that one as much, because I knew I did everything that I could to prepare and to get myself ready. And it was just, that one I felt more, it was just my body telling me that it's had enough of that stuff over its life.
Yeah.
But it was still a great experience. They're wonderful down there. They truly want you to succeed. They're really good people down there, and all of them have. I've made some good friends in both atmospheres. In the smoke divers and the one bad tour. There's people that I still talk to that I trust with opinions and thoughts and all that kind of stuff, and they're really good folks. And I wouldn't have met them if it wasn't for going down there. So
essentially, your failures really paved really great relationships for you in the service.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you all if I hadn't have tried those aspects. I mean, they inspired me to start writing, and to even though I'm not physically good enough, I'm like they said down in Florida, I'm part of the 10%. I'm not the 1% or the 3%, but I feel pretty daggum good being 10%er.
Yeah.
That's still a pretty good percentage, and that inspired me to start writing. And I'm really good at putting my thoughts down on paper, and I enjoy writing. So it's just something that I've kind of fell into, and I do some speaking around here and some stuff too that I'm trying to dabble into, and I've been enjoying it so far. And it's all because of the failures of the last year or so. And that's kind of the point is, failure is an option, because if you don't try to do something, you won't grow, you won't develop, you won't find out what you are good at.
Yeah.
And even though my younger years, I was probably better at physical stuff. My older years, I'm still pretty physical. I feel like I can hang my own with anybody, but, pen to paper seems to be more of my wheelhouse these days. So.
Yeah. So, and I don't know if Chris is going to unmute his mic to say anything when I talk about this because of how he sounds, but I keep hearing you say, and even in the article, you're like calling these people 1%ers, and you're okay with being a 10%er. And I mean, honestly, like when I look at the whole picture of people in the fire service, like if I were to like compare you to maybe some of the departments down here, people I know in the departments down here, you are a 1%er compared to a lot of these people that we know or we have or we see. And so, and I don't know, and I understand, like for me, right, like when I say that, I was trying to get another friend of mine to do the smoke divers with me, because that was a bucket list thing for me, and it was for myself, not like to get through something, to prove something to myself. But I do see a lot of people who it seems like and actually not to get off topic, but females, right? Females in the fire service seem to have to prove them, or feel like they have to prove themselves a lot. But I see it in the males too, a lot. So with things like doing smoke divers or things like that. And I just want to say that just because you left something that was really hard, I don't think it necessarily defines if you can do your job, or if you can stand next to your crew members, or if you can anything like that, because your 10% is still a 1%er, like the majority of the service.
Oh, definitely. And I agree with you. I don't come back to my own department and even compare myself to the coworkers I have, because they're all hard chargers. They love the fire service. They're great firefighters, but when you're in that atmosphere of the 1%ers, you compare yourself to them, and, I love all of them, and they're really great. And I might be better at, running a scene better than they are. Maybe they're just really great at searching and pulling hose, but that's where they are in a lot of times in their career. Us middle-aged guys, we try to cling on to our physical past, and I guess maybe I was kind of in that transition of it myself. So, and as I move on, I would take the Pepsi challenge against any mid-40s guy. I feel like I'd be hold my own. So
some of that. Like what?
Yeah, and I'm a chief now, so I don't have to. I'm not pulling hose and searching as much as maybe I used to. Mm-hmm. So I've tried to start moving my knowledge and training on what I'm going to actually be doing, which is command and fire scenes, and and personnel development and all that. And so that's where I'm kind of moving towards and trying to better myself in that. So.
So after these failures you had, and you were a training chief at one point, and I don't know, even battalion chief too, how do you foster an environment where failure is an option? So we're always told risk versus benefit. And are there examples of times where you've had your guys lean into risk for them to grow? Any kind of stories you have with that, with what you've learned throughout your experiences now?
I mean, I encourage risk as long as it's calculated, especially in training. I mean, it's okay to take a lot of people hold back in training because they're afraid to get hurt in training, and I do agree with that for the most part, but at the same time, that's where you learn where your boundaries are, is in training. You don't want to find out where they are when it truly matters. You want to find those in training. I think that's why the smoke divers and the one bad tours and all that stuff are so appealing to people, is because they get to push those boundaries to see what they're capable of. In my personal experience, after smoke divers, I mean, I was still company officer and we were able to pull somebody out of a fire, and I felt physically able to do that. I felt like I was able to talk on the radio and physically work to pull a victim out of a structure that I don't know that I would have felt able to do prior to. I would have been able to. I like to think I would, but it was so much smoother because for one, if I was in better shape, I was in really good shape. I was able to just stay calm. And, I tried to foster that in not necessarily the brand new firefighters, but those 2, 3, 4-year guys that are maybe haven't been tested yet. I try to make sure that they put themselves in positions that aren't comfortable, even if that's just personnel, issues, working with somebody they don't necessarily like, dealing with, things that the fire department has to do that they don't necessarily agree with. It starts there, I think. And then you want to actually train yourself, get yourself in gear, work out in gear, do hard training evolutions. And I think that's where a good training officer or a battalion chief or even a company officer can get their people into that, help those little scenarios and just a little bit at a time. And eventually they're able to take calculated risks that will benefit them and hopefully the people they serve.
Are there any particular drills or training practices you use intentionally to promote calculated risk training?
I personally like to just put some wax paper in somebody's mask so they kind of feel like they know what they're seeing through. I don't like to totally black out because that is realistic, but at the same time, not a lot of times. Let them see shadows through wax paper, and then, make something just difficult, even if it's just pulling a heavy dummy through a small hole or going through a window or something like that. But then, it's just like with your kids, don't do it for them. Let them do it themselves, or at least continue to do it until maybe they just physically get exhausted, and then either stop the scenario and talk through it. Or I don't like to intentionally make it to where people fail, because that's where I think it's where it gets lost. Is some people will make training scenarios where nobody could possibly win. Well, I don't think that's necessarily fair, but if they aren't making it through it, then stop the scenario, talk it through, give them a rest, and maybe try it again, because most people want to try it again to see if they can get it done. And that's kind of my go-to. It doesn't necessarily have to be hose advancement or search or throwing ladders. It can be anything. Whatever they're not comfortable with is what I want to work on. So, and then hopefully get some reps in myself and make myself better. So,
awesome.
Chris, I am going to unmute for just 1 second to ask you a question before I get too rough sounding. I'd like you just to speak on that a little bit more of the aftercare of a tough drill, because you get different instructors and different officers with different mentalities and approaches. And some of them will make a hard drill to prove that they can defeat someone, and some will make a hard drill to challenge someone. But the aftercare of that is like vitally important, right? So maybe you can go into what you've bred in your department or what you've what you've told your people to do to make sure that the challenging drills aren't defeating and that people are actually getting something out of it, not just feeling like, oh, Chris is going to make a crazy drill that we're going to fail and feel like crap, and he's going to berate us and prove how bad we are. Maybe you can just speak on that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the people that work with me, I mean, they've worked with me for a while, so they probably get tired of hearing me talking. I probably talk too much, but I just feel like you got to talk through a drill after it's happened, and maybe even before. Some of it is probably I'm used to being in that company officer role, so I'm still learning to just kind of sit back and be a chief, but I'm working on it. But I think they got to know. It's the universal debate that the younger generation, which I don't know what that is really, but the younger generation, they always say they want to know the why, so I try to explain the why to them. But then at some point, it's just like a young kid. Eventually you have to just say, this is the way you need to do it. I want to tell you the why, but, we can't always ask why. Sometimes we don't have the luxury of asking why. So let's do that why in training. Right. That way they know it, they can learn it. If we stop the drill, give them a few times. If they're not getting it, we're stubborn. We're all firefighters are stubborn. They're going to keep pulling on that dummy till they just can't do it anymore. Let them do it a few times. Let's see if they can get it, then stop it, take a breath, just let them take a drink real quick, and then we'll talk it through it, and we'll try different techniques, and then we'll back up, and maybe they got 3/4 of the drill correct. So we won't work on those. We'll just work on that one little section and try to, let's see if we can practice that. Maybe we need to take the mask off for a little bit, just learn the actual movement. And then my guys know that I like being physical. So usually they know any drill that I'm going to do is going to have some gear on or, a mask or something like that. And that's kind of my non-negotiable in a lot of stuff is this is what they're going to work in. I know the whole practice, how you play and all that kind of stuff is a saying that people use, but it's true. It's true. We won't have to do everything in gear. There's benefits to working out in shorts and all that kind of stuff. But when you're doing a true training drill that requires you to fail, let's fail in the way we're going to do it. So when that scenario comes for them, they know, okay, I'm getting to my point where I might need to call for help. Maybe I need to, talk to command. Maybe I need to talk to my company officer, say, hey, I'm having trouble doing this, or we've practiced this before. We're going to need more people in here to do this certain task. They won't know that until they are put in that scenario. I'm not a yeller. I'm not if anything, I'll stay more quiet when the process is, going bad.
Even worse.
Yeah. I guess it's the dad in me. I'll just sit there and look at him, it's, and I'll ask him, like, are you finished? And he'll be like, yeah. So, but, it's not all the time, but it's a lot of times. So I don't have a set way. It's personnel dependent. It's firefighter dependent. I'd be lying if it didn't say if it's whatever mood I'm in, we're all human. So you just do right by your people and don't try to make them worse, try to make them better. And I think if you just do that, then it all works out.
So for the younger firefighters who are struggling to balance humility and confidence, what kind of advice would you give them?
It's a process. That's probably the biggest advice I could give them. I don't have it all down. Having kids helps learn humility, and having a wife that will tell you that you're not quite doing something right, that helps too. But we work together. I would do the same thing to her. So we were having that growth of life experience and age, and bad things that happen and good things that happen. I think that's where it's all grown and where it's all developed from. And when you get somebody that's 19, 20, 22 years old that just hasn't had that opportunity, you have to build it in a little bit, and you can build that in training some.
Sure.
But at the same time, if they only fail And if they only lose their confidence by failing, that's a long life to constantly be,
Yeah.
low in confidence because failures keep happening. So you just talk them through it. You talk them through, you get to know them. You get to, I call them my kids now, because even if they're my age, if they're lower than me, then they're my kids.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to them about their families, talk about the struggles in life. And I'm pretty open about, my life. Probably overly open with some of those articles, throughout a lot, even today, my dad passed away a day and a half ago.
Oh gosh.
So right before this situation. So, but, he would want me to be here. He would want me to be here talking to you. And, my guys know all that stuff's going on and it's just part of the process, but, it sucks. But at the same time, you got to keep moving forward and you can't dwell on it too much. That doesn't mean that you forget about it. It just means you can't dwell on it. And it's all good stuff. So
how about I know at least for my own personal experience, people who are afraid of failure, right? So you see that too. So you'll see a lot of, and it's not just newer firefighters. It could be like you're, 5 to 10 year doing drills with like the ones who've been on for 20. And a lot of the times they, maybe try to blend in or go in the background because they don't want to look stupid. They don't want to fail in front of people who've been in this for 20 years and things. So what kind of advice would you give someone who's afraid of failure to get them to start, kind of leaning towards it?
That was what that article was all about, was talking to those people, the ones that are just afraid to take a chance, that kind of coast through. Maybe they got 5, 10, 15 years on and they realize they're not as good in their skills or their life or whatever it is that they should be. It's not going to get any better, so you got to start somewhere. And by throwing out those examples of what happened to me, that it just because you put yourself out there and you fail doesn't mean that it's bad. Sometimes it means that it opens up doors and that you never knew existed. Maybe it changes your outlook on, the fire service. Maybe it changes the outlook on your family and your kids and your soul. Maybe it changes so much. And, if you constantly go through life, afraid to do anything, to take a chance, to take a risk, to fail, it's got to be boring. If nothing else, it's got to be boring. Take a chance, get out there, try it. If you fail, it sucks, it stinks to fail, but at the same time, look at me. It opens up a lot of doors.
Well, we appreciate you hopping on and talking to us about this article. Like I said, it drew me in just from the title because that's not something that you familiarly hear from anybody, especially in, our service, especially when you are around a lot of like go-getters, and failure usually is never an option. Actually, I think we're, as far as we push through everything. It doesn't matter what it is. We'll push through everything. But I think that it's a good learning.
Yeah. Yeah. We say failures, there's no option to fail, but then we always fail. We can say it all we want, but there's always failure out there. So we either need to learn how to deal with it and move forward and grow from it, or that's when we start losing our confidence, is when we fail and we feel like there's no option but not failing.
Right.
So
right. And you said,
we just got to keep moving.
Yeah, you said that was you did say that in your article, is if you continuously have a failure mindset, you will always be a failure. And that's totally true. Scientifically, they've done all of that. It's the same thing with thinking positive and negative. The more negative thoughts that you create or say or whatever, the more likely it's going to happen. Same thing with being positive. If you stay positive things will happen. So that's a really, really good thing to hear. And hopefully people will start adapting to failure and taking it in with open arms. Hopefully. I know I will.
I hope so. Don't have to like it, but it's got to be a possibility, or you won't take a chance. So.
For sure. Chris, do you have anything to say before we let him go?
No, I think that was great. That's a great perspective that comes from experience that needs to be passed down to to all the kids, like you said, all the children. So, and the peers alike. Angie and I are constantly running into these issues, and I think it creates more mental fortitude and strength to, like you said, acknowledge that failure is an option and have that looming and still succeed, instead of just turning a blind eye to it and saying, no, it's never going to happen. Then it's more devastating when something goes wrong. So, no, man, I appreciate it. And thank you for your time. And Angie, great questions. I might just sit the rest of these out no matter what and just pretend like I have no voice because you did a great job. But no, thanks a lot, Chris. That was awesome.
We appreciate it.
Oh, thank you all very much.
It was so nice meeting you.
Remove carcinogens and get your gear compliant clean with Unimac laundry equipment. Find it at alliancelaundry.com/fire.